to put these links in the chat box for you. So both of those links are now in the chat. And like I said, it was just really invaluable. We weren't able to do everything that the field guide recommended because everything, again, was based on the area and the number of COVID cases and the services that we had available. But it was a really good starting point for us to see, like, this is where we want to try to be to run our programs safely. And then our next step was about building connections with our community and getting that support. So again, we knew that we were not the experts, and we relied heavily on our relationship with our local health department and the epidemiologist there to answer a lot of our questions. We put together a committee of nurses and doctors to help guide our decisions related to COVID. So we started meeting a few months before camp and really talking with them about what do we do if there is a case of COVID at camp, or if somebody comes in and just says that they have a stuffy nose, like for us, we didn't want to take that risk of like, if you're sick, then unfortunately you just can't be at camp because we don't know. So we need you to have a negative COVID test and then you can return back to programs because the impact that it could have on the rest of the program was so high. And then we also here in the US started doing monthly Zoom calls with other camps across the nation. And that was really helpful for us because we wanted to make sure that we were doing the best that we could and were aligning with what other camps were doing. And so to be able to talk about the policies and procedures that we were putting into place was really important. And that was really valuable for us. And then it was really important to also keep an eye on the numbers. So we felt comfortable during the summer to be able to run our programs at the 60% capacity. But we also found towards the end, as cases here in the US continue to rise, our positivity rate in Kentucky was above a 10%, which for us was too high. And so we had to make some hard decisions and actually canceled some of our one-day programs because there was too many people coming in and out of camp. So essentially we had to pick and choose of like, where can we keep people the safest at camp, our staff, our volunteers, and our campers. And people coming in and out every day was too risky at the end of our summer program. Any questions right now before we head into the next part? Okay, I will continue. And then we really started focusing on what our policies and procedures were going to be. We knew that we had to have some written things down for our families to for them to be able to see what we're doing. We took a lot of phone calls in the spring about camp, and parents are very worried. They want to make sure that their kid will be safe in our program. Unfortunately, on the other end, COVID in the US is very much a political thing. And so there were a lot of parents that were really angry that we were requiring kids to wear face masks during the day. A lot of parents that were angry. At one point, we were going to say that every kid had to have a negative COVID test when they wanted to come to camp, and it was like the end of the world for a lot of people. So the policies and procedures were backed by that health committee that we created with the doctors and nurses and the guidelines. And so when things got hard with people that disagreed with what we were doing, we had this to fall back on. It did mean that some people families chose not to come to camp during the summer because they didn't agree with the policies and procedures that we had, but we weren't willing to compromise in it because there were a lot of people that we had to keep safe. So we covered most of this. It was based off of our federal, state, and local regulations. Again, that field guide that I put in the chat was critical for our starting point. And then we learned a lot from what other camps were doing. So in the spring, there were a lot of areas that we knew we wanted to create policies and procedures for. And so we created this was in an Excel spreadsheet. And so we broke out different areas that we wanted to cover to make sure that we thought through what those were going to be. And then we assigned a team member to do the research around that in the field guide and what other camps were doing, so that we could then come back and create what our plan was going to be for our individual camp. So we're going to go through a few sample policies, and I tried to give a range of where different camps and what different camps were doing in the US, and then kind of show you where we landed. So the first one was pre-camp screening. And so there were a couple of different ways that camps landed with their policies around this. So the first one was that all campers and staff had to be fully vaccinated or provide a proof of a negative COVID test within 3 days of arrival to camp. So that one was not possible for us because, one, the vaccine was only approved for 12 and up in the US starting in the end of June. And our program started at the beginning of June. So all of our campers were unable to be vaccinated at that point. And then the COVID test was going to be really hard for a lot of our campers to have access to. And so we weren't, and the numbers in our community at that point were low enough that we felt okay as long as they were, we were doing some screening questions before they came, we felt like we didn't have to go with that level. The second one was that all staff and campers had to self-screen symptoms at home starting 14 days prior to arrival at camp. And so that involved taking their temperature at home, tracking any symptoms that they had. And then the third was all staff and campers had to complete a screening questionnaire upon arriving to camp. And that's where we landed. And so on arrival, every camper was asked, have you been exposed to anyone with COVID within the past 14 days? Are you feeling ill or any symptoms? And then during the summer 2020, we did temperature checks for everybody, but then we learned that that was not as an important part of the screening. It wasn't recommended in the US to continue that. And so we took the temperature check away, but that's where we landed with our policy for camp pre-screening. And then during camp monitoring, some camps landed, they had all campers and staff were given a COVID test upon arrival to camp. We were not in a point financially to be able to offer COVID tests to every single camper when they got here. Most of the camps that did that were longer term. And so thank you. So multiple week sessions are the camps that chose that option. We ended up landing on the all campers and staff will complete COVID symptom questionnaire and a daily check. So just in the morning when they woke up, how are you feeling? Are you having any symptoms? And if they said yes, then we had 2 nurses on our property during the summer, and they would see the nurse, and then the nurse would determine what the next steps would be for that. And then cohorts was another policy and procedure that we had to create. So for that, it was to try to minimize the number of people that each camper was coming in contact with. And so that way, if there was a exposure to COVID or a potential exposure to COVID, the impact could be as small as possible. And so some camps had all campers and staff were in a cohort, and those are the only people they interacted with. For us here at our camp, we did cohorting. It was a group of about 12 campers and staff that were together. They ate all of their meals together. They did all of their activities together. They did not interact with other groups of children during their activities. We did have some large group gatherings. So we do like a opening campfire. Sometimes our evening programs are together. And in those situations, it was really important for us to increase the protection that we were using. So masks, for example, were mandatory during those times when they were not with their cohort. And then the camps that were able to do the COVID testing on site, a lot of them, they were able to, once everybody had the negative COVID test, then they didn't have to worry about the face mask as much. But for us, that was an important piece of it. And then mask wearing. Some camps did wearing your mask all the time, no matter what, no matter who you are interacting with. For us, because we were cohorting and they were considered a family group, we went with the policy that campers and staff will wear masks at all times when indoors or when interacting with others not in their cohort. So when they were just with their group of 12 in their cabin, because they were sleeping and eating and doing everything together and considered that family cohort, they did not have to wear their face mask. But anytime that they were in close contact with another group, face mask had to be on. And then we know that spread was increased indoors. And so it didn't, even if they were with their cohorted group, they had to wear their mask when they were inside. And then other areas for policies and procedures that we had to think through. So we serve all of our meals at camp to our campers and staff, and we had to adjust how we did that. And so we moved from family style, where all of the food was on the table for the campers to share, to a cafeteria style where we could control who was holding the utensils and things like that. Physical distancing. So when they were with their cohort, they were allowed to be in close contact. We discouraged, like sometimes at camp, there's like a lot of like high-fiving and hugging and close games where you're playing tag. And we tried to minimize that as much as possible. If it was with somebody outside of their cohort, then we stuck to the 6 feet distance in between to limit the exposure there. Sleeping quarters were a big concern for us. Most of our cabins have open screens, and so they're getting that fresh air in. But a lot of camps had to adjust how they were, how kids were sleeping in the cabin, the filtration, all of that. cleaning and sanitizing. We did a lot. We put hand sanitizer stations everywhere. When you come and walk around camp, you'll find it like on trees and like on every door. So we're constantly doing that. Cancellations and refunds were a big policy that we had to create. We did not want families to feel obligated to come to camp because they had put money into the experience if their kid was sick. And so our policy was just, if you are not feeling well, we will give you 100% refund. There are no repercussions to not coming to camp because of COVID, because we wanted to keep the community safe as much as possible that was coming here. And then responding to a possible or confirmed COVID exposure. So again, we came up with all of our policies and procedures based off of that field guide from the American Camp Association, because they really just laid everything out for us. And then we were able to determine what exactly in that group we could feasibly do with the resources that we had for our community. The next pre-camp part we had to do was just the communication. We have a camp website, and so we created a dedicated page on our website that had everything about COVID that we thought our families needed to know. So we actually linked the field guide in there. We linked the guidelines from the Center of Control and Disease in there. So resources for families for just around COVID, and then frequently asked questions as well. So when are kids wearing face masks at camp? How are you doing sleeping? All of that. And then we sent weekly emails out to all of our families on Fridays, starting in March, so that they could just start to have all the information. And things here were changing weekly. Like every week there was a new regulation or a change to a regulation. And so that helped us keep everybody informed on what was happening. And then the last part was just making sure that we had really clear communication that there was still a chance that COVID could happen at camp. We were trying really hard for that not to be the case, but didn't want the expectation for families to be like camp is a COVID-free zone, because it definitely, we could not guarantee that at all. And so having to make some harder decisions for families with kids that had were more at risk, camp just wasn't the right place for them at that time, but can come back in a future year. And then working with our staff, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping them updated and getting their input. A lot of the changes that we had to make to the programs and the policies, they were the ones that were going to be implementing it. And so we needed to make sure that we were making decisions that they felt they could support and get behind. And so we did monthly meetings with them just to go over, like, this is what we are thinking about right now. What's your opinion? What do we need to change? And that was really valuable to make sure that the staff was on board headed into the summer for what was going on. And then we do a week-long staff training with all of our staff that are coming for the summer. And we knew that we had to adapt that a lot. And so we offered both in-person and a virtual training option for all of our staff. And so that was really helpful to be able to, a lot of our staff attend colleges in different states. And traveling was really hard at that time. They could commit to being at camp during the summer, but getting to camp for training was really difficult, and school schedules were pushed back. And so we adapted everything into a virtual setting, and they had a cohorted group that they did their learning with. And then we had the in-person as well. And then we also created dedicated training time and in-services throughout the summer, specifically around COVID. So we do a weekly staff meeting on Sundays to check in with the staff and how things are going. And during that, we would do reminders about our COVID policies or things that maybe we struggled with the week prior. And then also used that time to again go back and say what's working and what's not working and how do we need to adapt to this. Any questions on the policies and procedures or the resources that I provided?
Megan, a short question for clarification about acceptance, kids being fully vaccinated. Was it the obligation imposed by the government, or was it your decision?
It was each camp's decision about the vaccination and who you could accept based off of that.
Did you meet resistance as well? Because you told that you met resistance even about the masks.
Yes, there definitely. So we didn't require everyone to have vaccination this summer, but it was highly encouraged. And there was a lot of pushback from some families of like even suggesting that everybody have a COVID vaccination. We weren't saying they had to, but parents were mean and angry about that. So that is something that we are considering for next summer because here in the US, they are working on the vaccine for 5 and up. It will probably be approved within the next month or so. And so there is a chance that we will require everyone to have a vaccine in order to attend camp next summer, just given the that they are staying overnight in a community, the risk is higher. And so I imagine we'll get a lot of pushback from that. But again, it's something that we are willing to take on of, you know, not having the angry parent, like their kids just won't attend camp this summer. And that will be, it's hard because we want the kid to be, the kid needs camp, but also we have to keep everybody safe. And there's potential for the regulations here in the US to change with the vaccine becoming widely available, that it may be one of the vaccines required for school attendance. And that is a rule that we have, they have to be, all their vaccines have to be up to date that are required for school. So. Right. Okay, so next I want to talk just a little bit about the during camp, kind of what that process looked like and some of those changes. So as I had mentioned, as we were setting our policies and procedures, our cabins were cohorted and did all of their activities and meal times together. So 400 campers, but all in groups of 12 that rarely interacted with other cabins. We switched our meals from family style to cafeteria style. We minimized the number of large group activities. In 2020, we decided to close a lot of our activities. We weren't sure how to handle like all of the cleaning, and also we just did not have the staff available to be able to operate it. So in 2021, we were able to do that. And then we had less movement of staff and volunteers. So in previous years, we could just be like, oh, we need you to go help in the dining hall, or we need you to go help with this group of campers, or you need to go lead this activity. But we really had to minimize that so that the staff were just interacting with the same cohorted groups to minimize their risk of exposure. So some of the safety protocols that we put into place, again, we had 2 nurses on camp property, which was really helpful for us. That's of course not always available. And so some camps adapt it and had like somebody that could be on call, or if you had like your local clinic or hospital, then that would be an option as well. We had very clear communication that anyone who was feeling ill or had been exposed to someone with COVID should not and could not attend camp. And so we made the decision, you know, even if a camper was saying it's just allergies, it's fine, we're not going to take that risk. And so we are lucky enough that we have a couple places nearby that were doing COVID tests. And so the parents would come pick the child up from camp, take them, get their COVID test. Once it was negative and their symptoms were resolved, then they were allowed to come back to the program. And then the cohorting was really important for us for the contact tracing piece of it, as to who would have to quarantine at camp and who wouldn't. And again, all of our campers were coming from about a 45-minute drive to our camp. And so we just set the expectation with the families that if they had to quarantine or if we needed them to get a COVID test, that it was the parents' responsibility to come get the camper and take them, or the camper would quarantine at home. And then our plans for when we would have a positive case. Again, I'm like so thankful we did not have to do any of this summer. We had some good policies and procedures to protect us, but also I think there's a bit of luck in that, that we didn't have any COVID case. So, but we had to be prepared for it. And so determining who was going to have to quarantine, for us, it would be the cohort. If there was a positive case, what the impact on the current program would be. There were several camps this summer who, once they reached about 3 positive COVID cases, decided to just go ahead and cancel their programs for a 2-week period, because the impact with the staff having to quarantine and the volunteers left them with no one being able to really operate and run the programs safely. And that kind of goes into the impact on the future weeks of like, are we going to have enough staff to be able to run the things, or do we have to make those hard decisions? Who it had to be reported to, and then what the cleaning and sanitizing procedures were going to be for that. And then our daily operations, again, all the hand washing, all the hand sanitizer constantly. We provided our staff with a backpack that included hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, extra masks, so that there was never an excuse of like, oh, I don't have my face mask with me, because kids tried that all the time during the summer. And sometimes they weren't in a location where they could wash their hands. And so we just wanted to make sure that we were limiting the number of excuses that people could have to like not keep clean, and follow the policies and procedures. We did extra cleaning of our shared supplies and high touched areas. We had our extra masks in the dining halls and other indoor area facilities where mask use was required. We decided to do a no visitor policy this summer. Typically it was fine for people to come at camp, but we just didn't want to have that risk. And then we had to hire way more staff and volunteers than we thought we would need. It was challenging, like finding staff was hard to begin with, but we needed that extra layer in case a staff member was the one not feeling well, or if they had to quarantine, to be able to back it up so that we weren't falling short on that expectation. So then just the impact on campers and staff that we saw this summer. Joel talked a lot about the mental health concerns were greater this year, and I 100% agree with that. We saw way more campers coming in with both diagnosed and undiagnosed anxiety and depression, and that was really hard on the campers and the staff. We saw a huge amount of increase in self-harm reported to staff. We really had to teach the campers to like how to live in community again with non-family members. They were like, they didn't know how to make friends. They didn't know how to talk to people. They were afraid to introduce themselves to one another. All they wanted to do was be on their phone or play video games. And so that was really challenging. And they didn't know how to deal with conflict. So we had to implement some conflict resolution strategies with our staff so that they could help teach the campers that, because they had been out of school for a year and a half at that point, and not interacting much with other people. And then also an interesting thing we saw, it was just a higher amount of homesickness with our older campers. So again, we go up to 15, and I think we had more homesickness with our 12 to 15-year-old range, whereas typically it's our 6 to 9-year-old range. So it kind of flipped for us this summer. And a lot of it seemed to go back to the mental health concerns of they were just having a lot of anxiety about living in community and being around so many other teenagers. And so that was a challenge for them. And then the impact on staff was kind of similar, actually. It definitely took more time to get them back into the responsibilities of camp. Living in the community, the camp schedule was really hard. They had gone from like being fully in control of their own schedule because everything was online for them in college. So they could do things whenever they wanted to, could take a nap whenever they wanted to, talk to their friends whenever they wanted to. And at camp, it was a strict schedule. And so that was really challenging for them. So we had to make changes along the way to help them feel supported and so that they could do their best work. And then again, like with the campers, the mental health concerns were definitely on the rise. More support was needed. We had to have we had on-call counseling available for our staff so that they could talk to someone. We didn't have a social worker on property. That was just something that we weren't able to do in time for camp. And so we had to use our outside resources to be able to figure that out, to support them through that. And it was really challenging for them dealing with all of the mental health concerns of the campers, and then, you know, them kind of taking that on themselves. So kind of navigating that was a challenge. All right. Last thing that I have is just really talking about the lessons learned from this summer. And so for us, the flexibility and ability to adapt was critical to our success. So our policies and procedures, we had to be willing to change as things in our community changed. We started our summer off with like our face mask policy. We had to get stricter as the summer went because our cases were getting higher in our community. And so we had to make those changes. In the spring, we were planning to have, our state was saying that everybody had to come with a negative COVID test, and we adapted that to doing the screening just before they came because we knew that access to COVID testing was too hard for a lot of our families. So the flexibility and ability to adapt were huge. And then communication was big, just constantly communicating with our families, with our community, with the staff, making sure that everybody was on board was really important. Some of the changes that we made due to COVID were actually just better camp changes overall. So for us, we like changed the way that we did our check-in, where everybody stayed in the car. The parents did not get out of the car. We did check-in with them. We asked all of the questions, and then we got the kid out of the car, got their stuff, and then the parent left. And that was just, it made check-in so much easier. we changed it because of COVID, and now we're like, okay, well, I think we're going to keep this moving forward. And so COVID brought some great programmatic changes to make things just a little bit easier with how we do things. We have to be vigilant. We, again, kind of like with the face mask thing, like people got comfortable, and if we weren't constantly reminding them about things, then we could have had like a really big problem on our hands of like the exposure to COVID. And so it was annoying to constantly have to remind people to put your face mask on when they're indoors, but it was just like something we had to keep doing about every hour so that we could keep everybody safe. And then being willing to make hard decisions. Like I was talking about before, we want camp to be for everyone, but in this situation, we had to draw hard lines of like, if you are not able to follow the policies and procedures, then unfortunately camp is not the right place for you at this time. And there were a lot of hard conversations with families about that. And on the other end of families wanting their kid to come to camp, but for health reasons, like they had to be cleared by a doctor to come, and like we had to listen to that decision. So health-wise, what camp wasn't the right place for everybody either this summer. And then Joel said this yesterday, kids and teens need camp more than ever after the past year and a half of COVID. And there was so much growth and so much happiness this summer, and kids just being able to be kids after a really hard time. And so for us, that just meant like, how can we get back to, just make sure that we have the programming and the space available for them to come together. And so as we look forward to summer 2022, our hope is that we'll be able to be back to our full programming and offerings, and then thinking through again, like what are the things we need to still bring back in to help support the campers, because we know like this year is still going to be pretty hard and for them. So we're going to be increasing our mental health services for our campers and for our staff. And then kind of thinking through like what other things do we need to implement into our programs to best support them. So that is what I have on COVID and camp. And
we are having 2 questions in the chat.
Okay.
The first one, the question is about the financial support. Has the government anyhow covered the expenses on extra needs, new staff, people, sanitizing equipment, etc.?
So there were a few grants that were available that helped cover cost of COVID testing, that helped cover cost of some of the cleaning supplies. Our local health department helped to provide face masks for us for free. Some of our local stores this year also provided free sanitizing wipes and face masks and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily from the government. There were some government provided support, but a lot of it was like local communities had the things to offer us in that way. And then there were, the government also did some loans to companies. And so our YMCA applied that to help cover some of the loss. And we had to lay off a lot of our staff in 2020. So because we couldn't afford to keep staff on. And so they provided some loans to help cover that cost so we could bring people back.
And probably the question is following the first one. Because of the pandemics, did you have to raise up the price of the camp or not?
We did not raise the price of camp this past summer, and we increased the amount of financial aid that we were able to offer. So we knew that families, the year was really hard on families financially, and we didn't feel like that was something that we were able to do at that point, and we just really wanted to make sure that any kid that wanted to come to camp could. And so typically we have a financial assistance scale that starts at 10% and goes up to 100% of covering the cost of camp. And this year, our minimum was 50% to 100%. So we increased the amount of financial assistance that people would get, which was helpful for a lot of families.
Thank you, Megan. There is one more question. What would you have done in a different way in case you had been aware of the coming pandemics?
A little foreshadowing.
Difficult.
Yeah. I think the things that we did in our non-summer season, I would have increased as much as possible. The support that we were able to, like provide families and our staff, I would have started earlier of like, what do you need? How can we help you? So I think like doing a monthly Zoom call with our staff, as soon as that's something that I'm considering this year of like, I'm just going to start talking to them every month now and keeping them connected and seeing what support that they need to be able to help earlier so that when we come to summertime, it's a little less hard. We were lucky with how our program was already set up. Our cabins did all of their activities together, whereas a lot of camps have it where campers can pick what activities they want to go to, and they're intermixing all the time. So we had a little bit less stress in that way, but that was something that a lot of camps have moved to, is like sticking with their cabin group for things more.
Thank you. One more question appeared. Did you have control from the government side about the following policies and procedures, about the procedures you mentioned?
Yeah, it was very different state to state and camp to camp. And so in Kentucky, they told us all we had to do was follow the CDC, so the Center for Control of Disease and Prevention, their guidelines that they had. So as long as we were meeting those, then everything else was outside or was in our control of what we decided. There were some states in the US where they laid out each policy and procedure basically for you. They told you how many campers you could have. They told you what you had to do as far as sleeping goes, how you could do meals, how you were doing testing and vaccination. And then on the flip side, there were a few states that said, do whatever you want. We're not giving you any regulations at all, so you decide. So it very much varied per location. We had a decent amount of control as to which policies and procedures we wanted to implement. And we tried to go for like a higher level than what was provided from the state.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Probably you want to voice them.
It looks like one more came in. So if a kid is sent back home because of a positive test, would he or she have a chance to return after the negative test? Yes, they would have the opportunity to return. So we followed the quarantine set by our local health or our health officials. And so they wouldn't, because our sessions are just 1 week long and most campers only come for 1 week, they wouldn't be able to come back for that week, but they could come back for a future week. So they had to quarantine for 10 days, and symptoms had to be getting better in order for them to return. The negative test is a little bit challenging because some people would still be testing positive a few days after that 10-day quarantine, like they still have the antibodies in them to have a positive test, but the doctor cleared them. So we usually went by the doctor note for that.
Well, people are thinking, Megan, you mentioned that you have created groups of 12 people, like cabins for campers, and that was quite a big change in the camps. So actually, it sounds like that the camp has become very small for a kid, like approximately 20-30% less in its size. Has this fact influenced the program and the impact on kids, do you think?
I think that this past summer, it worked in our favor because the large group was really overwhelming. For like when we got in larger groups, that became a point of high anxiety for a lot of campers. And so to be able to keep it small with people that they could become familiar with, I think really helped on the social side of things for them. They had a family unit that they really felt connected to, and their counselors that they knew could support them. Of course, there definitely was some like, oh, we miss these like really big things, or like what happens if you don't get along with with like that small group that you're assigned to, but you have really good friends, 2 groups over. And the ability to interact with people that are just different from you, which is one of like the really beautiful things of camp. So I think that aspect had been missed a little bit. But I think where we are at this point, it was a positive thing.
Yeah, sure. They just came from the isolation, so probably better way.
And may I just follow your question, Olga? I think our connection is low.
Yeah, please speak. We can hear you. Now you are frozen.
I think we have some problems with connection. So, okay, my question is, as you, Olga, asked about like smaller groups, and Megan, are you going to probably
continue?
Is that okay? I think the question was like, are you going to continue small groups?
Anastasia, I think that we missed the end of the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. We lost our internet right now. It's okay. So yeah, my question was, Megan, are you going to keep like smaller groups in the future, or you are probably going to get back to your standard form? So would you just give some words? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we will end up doing a bit of a hybrid version moving forward. I think for summer 2022, we will probably stick as of now with the small groups. It's really hard I think a lot is going to change over the next couple of months still, and how we're going to be able to operate this coming summer. So the small groups, I think, yes, we will definitely continue with that, and provide some additional time for them to interact with other people though too, for chunks of time. So for like a choice activity period or for some other learning opportunities, kind of do some intermixing. but I think mostly we'll stick to like a small group format for most of our day.
All right, so looks like questions are not coming anymore. I'm making long pauses so to let people speak. All right.
I did put my email in the chat, and if you have any other questions, or if you want additional resources that I might be able to help, I'm more than happy to send them your way. So please feel free to email me at any time.
Megan, thank you so much. Thank you hugely for the information you provided, for the approach that you shared, and also for the link to links that you shared. I looked very quickly through them. I think just to take one of the guides and really to take some practical tips how to organize a safe camp. It is already like a big hand to YMCAs. Thank you so much. This is so helpful.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so thanks for coming. Yeah, I'm sure that just YMCAs will be happy. YMCAs here will be happy for further cooperations with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your